Lawmakers in the House may have just killed the Trans-Pacific Partnership, or TPP. Now, a quick refresher here, the TPP is a new trade deal in the works that would open up markets between nations along the Pacific Rim, like the United States, Canada, and Japan. But there are major concerns that the trade deal could hurt workers in the United States and infringe on online privacy and a free and open internet. Those concerns are only heightened by the high level of secrecy surrounding the TPP trade negotiations, where even members of Congress have complained they're being shut out of the process by more powerful transnational corporations. Now, despite all of that, this trade deal was headed for fast-track approval in Congress, meaning it couldn't be filibustered and it couldn't be amended. This is basically the way Congress has passed every trade deal over the last few decades. But this time, things may work differently. 170 lawmakers in the House have signed on to a letter telling the Obama administration that they will not grant fast-track authority on the TPP, a move that could effectively kill the trade deal altogether. Not only that, some of the inner workings of the TPP have now been dragged out of the shadows and into the sunlight. This morning, WikiLeaks leaked the actual text of the intellectual property chapter of the Trans-Pacific Partnership, a 95-page document revealing in great detail just where negotiations currently stand on a number of very important IP issues. The documents expose the United States as one of the primary drivers of a slew of new anti-consumer laws that could take effect all across the Pacific. Joining me now to discuss more about these new developments in the TPP is Peter Maybarduk, the Director of Access to Medicine at Public Citizen, and James Love, Director at Knowledge Ecology International. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining me here. James, I want to start with you. This really is one of the first times we've gotten such a glimpse into TPP negotiations here. They've been extremely secret. As I said, members of Congress haven't even been privy to a lot of this stuff. What do these documents released by WikiLeaks today kind of show us?
Well, it's remarkable. We have to depend on WikiLeaks to find out what the hell's going on. I mean, the agreement is really about patents and copyrights primarily. Some issues about trademarks. These are not, you wouldn't think, big state secrets, but it's a battle. It's really, this chapter has really been driven by the lobbying by the pharmaceutical companies in Hollywood. And what you see in here is the United States tabling a whole slew of proposals that would benefit pharmaceutical companies and Hollywood in the patent and copyright area and that sort of thing, and then you see the pushback from other countries, and so you can see on any particular issue how the various members, Japan, Australia, Malaysia, Peru, different countries kind of fall out on these things.
And I noticed in your report today that you wrote up, there's still a lot of negotiating to be done. The report showed that on a lot of these provisions, there's not agreement between the United States and other nations, and that gives people who are seeing these documents an incredible opportunity to weigh in here.
Well, yeah, and I mean, the U.S. is talking like they're going to close the agreement out by the end of the year. There's 900 brackets in the text. I mean, you know, they have the next meeting next week. I mean, this isn't the most recent version, but there's not a lot changed since this version was written. So, I think it's hard to say. What we don't know is politically what kind of deals are being made. I think that the U.S. is going to trade market access to the United States, which will cost some people their jobs in the United States, in return for these other countries endorsing some measure of anti-consumer provisions that will keep drug prices high and will expand the rights of publishers at the expense of consumers.
Peter, on this issue of keeping drug prices high, I don't think a lot of people understand, are aware of the patents that go into medicine and patenting surgical methods. What do these documents show about how certain medicines that are created in the U.S. or surgical methods that are created in the U.S. Aren't exactly going to be as available to other parts of the world that need them?
That's right. Well, it's called a trade agreement, but really this is a secretive rulemaking against public health, and it would lead to preventable suffering and death in Asia and Latin America while binding U.S. consumers to high drug prices, bad rules here at home. There are a number of bad proposals that have been advanced by Big Pharma, and as you mentioned, includes, incredibly, patents on surgical methods, on the methods that the doctors are actually using on patients, their treatment practices, anything that's not with the doctor's bare hands, potentially patentable, monopolized, You can
This is
sue
something that
doctors
wasn't the
over it.
way before, right? I mean, surgical methods used to be something that people could just use that couldn't be patented.
There are only 2 countries in the world that recognize these patents. One is the United States. The other is Australia, which actually opposes the U.S. proposal in the text. 80 countries have banned these procedures outright as an outrageous violation of medical ethics.
This move in the House to kind of stand up against this fast tracking of this trade deal, is that really significant? Because if all these countries are coming together to negotiate something, and they're afraid that whatever they come up with, that the U.S. is going to take it back to Congress, and Congress is going to amend it and make all these changes to it, they just might walk away from the table, these other countries. So could this move to not fast track it actually kill the trade deal altogether?
Yeah, well, I think you have to have pressure on both sides. It's an outrageous secretive process, and this is going to significantly increase the pressure, not only the congressional move, but the fact that for the first time, countries' proposals are exposed, and the United States is visibly isolated. It has clearly lost the debate and is simply trying to bully and pressure countries by hook or by crook into lining up with Big Pharma and Hollywood anywhere the United States can get that agreement. But it's really not looking very good for those proposals here.
James, this deal gives enormous power to transnational corporations, and it weakens the power, to some extent, of sovereign governments to be able to pass laws that affect their own citizens. And this comes down to this whole dispute resolution process and these kind of courts that are created in this deal. Can you explain more about this process by which corporations can sue governments over laws that help consumers?
I think that's the most important thing that's going to take place in this agreement. Most trade agreements, or most people think of trade agreements as agreements between countries. The World Trade Organization, you can only have a dispute if a country sues another country, and that does happen, but it doesn't happen with huge amount of frequency, partly because countries are kind of reluctant to do that, and maybe they have, if it's something about their intellectual property laws, they may have something in their own country that they don't really want to fight over. But if you extend the right to litigate these things to private companies, as the TPP does in the investor-state provisions, then you're asking really Disney or Pfizer or Monsanto if they want to challenge a provision in a country's law, and they really have nothing to lose. And they will. They will then push the envelope, and they really push these things. So right now, you've gone from a situation for a lot of these provisions where they could maybe test it, or they could try and get a government to test it in the WTO. Now they can try the WTO. If that doesn't work, they can try to have a government raise it in the TPP, this regional trade agreement. And if that doesn't work, they can just bring an action themselves. And if a company wins against a government, you can have massive fines that the country has to pay to the private investors just for doing something that's designed to protect consumers.
You know, this is one chapter of the agreement. There are 29. There are 28 chapters left, shrouded in secrecy. If this one chapter does so much, what do the other 28 chapters do? That's
a frightening point, and this comes amid a time where people are afraid of UN one world governments and stuff with all these treaties. This seems like one world government here, this trade deal. We're out of time here. 5 seconds, quick. You got a point.
Well, yeah, I mean, it should not be secret. The only reason I think it is secret is because there's no one in the White House and there's no one in the Congress that's willing to say that it should be public, other than maybe Elizabeth Warren and Ron Wyden. I mean, it's been very little congressional support for this.
It was Peter Maybarduk, Director of Access to Medicine at Public Citizen, and James Love, Director of Knowledge Ecology International. Thank you both.
Thank you.